Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Cloverwood Senior Living, independent living in Pittsford, encouraging an active lifestyle, providing creative arts programming, woodland trails, and seasonal menus to support whole person wellness and growth. More online at cloverwood.org.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour is made on graduation day, high school graduation day. For decades, the number of American students choosing to go from high school to higher education institutions has been slowly clipping upwards. Earning a college degree meant a higher likelihood of earning more money in your life. Going to college was something that was viewed as a strong move for students, and you certainly never heard politicians bashing higher education. That is, until recently. President Trump and many of his fellow travelers in the administration argue that college is not just, in many cases, a waste of time, but it's a place where students go to be indoctrinated by the cultural left. And so what kind of job future does the president see? He says his tariffs are going to bring back manufacturing in big numbers. The United States is going to get back to producing in a big way. And while you won't hear many Democrats endorse tariffs, more are talking about the need to bring back manufacturing, especially in rural America. Alfred University President Mark Zupan has a different idea. Writing for U.S. News and World Report recently, he argues, quote, "What does it take to make America great? As a university president and economist, I believe it means looking forward rather than backward to ensure our country's success and preeminence in a globalized economy. A century ago, it would have been folly to invest in an outdated agricultural economy at the expense of the then roaring manufacturing sector. It is just as foolhardy today to attempt to resuscitate a manufacturing sector that's been in decline for half a century when knowledge-based services power today's global economy and the labor market is undergoing dramatic changes brought on by advanced technology, artificial intelligence, and automation," end quote. And so let's think back to that high school graduation stage. Things would have been different a generation ago. But now the number of students who are applying to college and going on to study at higher education institutions is starting to decline. We've talked about a possible enrollment cliff that faces higher education, and the reputational damage has been significant. This hour, we welcome the president of Alfred University to talk about not only his piece for U.S. News and World Report, but we're going to talk about the state of the economy, higher ed's place in it, the future of higher ed, and more. And Mark, it is great to have you. Welcome. Thanks for taking time for the program today.
Evan, thanks for inviting me. Pleasure to be back with you.
So you're the president of a university and you're an economist. And so I think the president would say you are just an elitist by trade. Is that right?
Grew up in a middle-class family in the Midwest, originally from upstate New York. But have had, thanks to the dint of my parents' hard work, the opportunity to go to college. So have benefited from higher ed. My parents came to this country with just suitcases.
Well, look, we're going to go in a lot of different directions here, but let me just start with asking how things are going at Alfred. And what I mean by that is we recently talked to some of your colleagues at places like Cuyk College, where they're kind of holding strong. They're a small school, 1,300 enrollment, and a lot of different institutions, bigger institutions, are seeing fewer applications. They're concerned about enrollment cliffs in the future. What's the story at Alfred?
We're seeing a great uptick in applications, completed apps, except for the fall. COVID did put a dent in enrollment. We've largely rebounded from that. And we've, with our board and our campus community, just shortened our mission statement to 5 words, helping students realize their purpose. Psychologists who study this say people that can identify and live their purpose live longer, healthier, happier lives. And people have wide-ranging purposes. You need to benefit from mentors along the way, guides, having just a myriad of curricular, co-curricular pathways. You can mix and match intersections, we call them. One of our trustees calls us the biggest small university around because we have a top 50 material science engineering program on our campus, the world's leader in ceramic engineering, glass engineering science, a top 10 art school, a college of business that's rated in the top 100, and a liberal arts and sciences college with the Phi Beta Kappa chapter. So you got a lot of opportunities to mix and match. And our core value is inclusivity, or fostering a sense of belonging. And that's an asset because it brings together people with different backgrounds, different outlooks, and you grow as a person when you're exposed to those differences.
How many students do you have on campus?
Roughly 1,700 and another 600 in master's programs in the New York City area. And then we have another 300 graduate students. So the first statistic was the undergrad students on campus.
We're talking to Mark Zupan, president of Alfred University. And Mr. President, I do wonder if you think schools that have 17,000, not 1,700 on campus, or like Keuka College, 12 or 1,300, do you think those mid-size or bigger schools are going to be facing a different situation than you are? Do you think you have an advantage being smaller?
We do, not that the others don't have important advantages. So when it comes time to attracting students who are into Division I athletics or big time athletic events overall, schools like Clemson, Mississippi, Alabama have seen some nice growth patterns of the flagship public universities. But we think there are important advantages to smaller, more intimate settings like Alfred University. And just point to an example, we have one of our top graduates back in 2022, Anu Adaloy, came to us from Nigeria. And he just completed his PhD a year ago in aeronautical engineering at UT Austin, now pursuing MBA studies there. He wants to be an aeronautical engineering entrepreneur. And when I visited him a couple of years ago in Austin, he said, it's striking how many of my doctoral classmates at UT Austin came from R1 schools, so big research institutions like The Ohio State or University of Illinois, but they were largely taught by graduate students, and they didn't get to touch the equipment that I did as an undergraduate student at Alfred University. And our dean, Gabby Gausted, who's a 2004 alum, the same thing. After she graduated from here, went to MIT and had the same striking impression. Classmates largely from R1, had graduate students primarily at the undergrad level, not faculty as mentors, and didn't have the chance to touch the research equipment she did at Alfred. And we just recently received an important Carnegie classification, one of only 2 universities our size with that classification in the country. Last 3 years, our faculty and staff have secured $39 million in research grants, and that works out to $9,200 per undergrad student per year. So the primary focus in our place like ours is the undergraduate student experience, and research is meant to inform the experience, whereas a lot of R1s, it goes to graduate study or research for its own sake. So we think we can successfully differentiate given our size and our mission and leaning into our 3 core strengths.
I want to return coming up here to the question of foreign students and the value that you see students from all backgrounds bringing in, and whether that is more challenging with the current administration. But before we do that, I want to touch on this idea of manufacturing and where the future job base is. As I mentioned, you're not just the president of a university, you're an economist, and you wrote in your piece for U.S. News and World Report that you think it is foolhardy to attempt to resuscitate the manufacturing sector that has been in decline for half a century in this country. I want to listen to 2 pieces of sound here. The first is just from last week. This is President Trump talking about what he sees as the future of, in his words, making things in America.
We want to make military equipment. We want to make big things. We want to do the AI thing with the computers and the many elements. But the textile, I'm not looking to make T-shirts, to be honest. I'm not looking to make socks. We can do that very well at other locations. We are looking to do chips and computers and lots of other things. And tanks and chips, meaning ships, yeah.
Okay, chips 4 times there, so a lot of chips, I think, in the future. But he's not the only one. I want to listen to another piece of sound, and this is from one of the possible presidential contenders for 2028. This is from last year during the presidential campaign, former Labor Secretary or Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg talking about comparing records and saying that he believes Democrats are going to be even bigger on manufacturing than the Trump administration.
I grew up in Indiana and live in Michigan. I have seen how the industrial Midwest went into a manufacturing recession under Donald Trump and has experienced a manufacturing renaissance under the Biden-Harris administration. Why is that? Because the Biden-Harris administration has led on policies that have factories rising out of the ground of places, including places like near where I grew up, that haven't seen this kind of investment in a generation.
That's Pete Buttigieg. So Mark Zupan, he's saying that there was a manufacturing renaissance going on over the last 4 years, that there are factories rising out of the ground in rural America. And your essay indicates you think that that's probably overblown or not all that plausible for the future. How do you square this?
It plays better politically, and there certainly have been successes that we should tout and be proud of. But when you look since the 1950s, manufacturing has been on a declining path. And the best way I would argue to keep it as an important force is through the services sector, through a knowledge-based economy, through AI, touring these factories, the extent to which technology is driving successful US manufacturing enterprises, that if you manufacturing for its own sake, we will miss the boat if we go down that road. So we should, but knowledge-based and services in general account for 4 out of 5 jobs nowadays in the United States, and it's been a growing sector over the last 7 decades.
I am curious to know if you think NAFTA was a mistake.
No, I don't believe so. That it led to a very effective division of labor in a sense, tying in different countries' strengths on the North American continent. And I think it would be a mistake to undo those strengths that have been built up, because it allowed us collectively to compete better on the global stage. When you look at the automobile industry, when I was growing up in Ohio, that was in a serious state of decline. It's made a nice rebound. It's seen some great innovations. Immigrants have come to the United States, people like Elon Musk and what they did with Tesla. And you look at the overall power of immigrants and what they can do for the U.S. economy, the more open we can be to talent, thoughts, and trade, that's the recipe for national success. And when you look at countries that have become less open, whether it's Venice in the 1200s, China or the Ottoman Empire in the 1400s, they've put themselves on the road to decline, as opposed to a secret sauce to the Roman Republic was its openness to people and to trade and to ideas. And when it became leaning into the Roman Empire and more authoritarian, where fewer people had agency in their society, they put themselves on the road to decline.
Let me also ask you about some of the data that you cite in your piece for U.S. News and World Report. You write, of the 100 U.S. counties with the highest productivity, nearly half are home to at least one research university, according to analysis by Mark Miro and Shreya Methkupali of the Brookings Institution. These 44 communities represent less than 1.5% of the counties in America, yet they generate 35% of our nation's economic output. I wouldn't challenge that data. I think what I would hear probably most often from rural listeners is that not every rural community has an Alfred as an anchor. That the vast majority do not. And that in the future, they may feel like the political promises of bringing back manufacturing sound, rosier than a knowledge economy that they can't really see and touch and feel and already don't feel like they're part of. So what's the message for them?
It's a fair point. Monroe County is one of those 44 counties in the Brookings study that just came out this year. So institutions like the U of R and RIT, and we're blessed with 18 universities in the greater colleges in the greater Rochester area. In Allegheny County, where Alfred's located, we're blessed with 3 higher ed institutions, Houghton as well and Alfred State. And in terms of job growth and also accounting for the total number of jobs, it's an important economic element. And the more we can foster a brain gain to rural areas through higher ed institutions, and throughout the United States, we are blessed with higher ed institutions in the rural area, those can become potent mini Ellis Islands for more rural counties like Allegheny County. And then finding a way from with the students we attract. We've just recently launched an entrepreneurial institute through our College of Business that gets more hands-on learning experiences for our students across our different academic units with the entrepreneurial life and bringing ideas to life. That can be an important recipe for a county like Allegheny County to be more successful.
And so when you talk about, the things that Alfred is doing, no doubt, we've talked to some of the people on your staff, some of the students who've come through your school to talk about the future of materials, glass, ceramics, all kinds of really interesting developments happening there. And that's just, sort of a slice of what's going on there. I will tell you, Mr. President, it's blown me away what's happening there. But I also think about the future of the working class that doesn't attend. And some of the jobs that you're talking about there are not necessarily just for people who are attending the schools or graduating with degrees. But is there a typical set of jobs when you think about the future of the working class, maybe the rural working class, that their grandparents were either agricultural in the agricultural sector, but also maybe did have some kind of manufacturing base? What does the knowledge economy look like in the working class for rural America?
I think there's still wonderful opportunities. And if anything, COVID and what we've seen in the labor dynamics. So we're the only place in the United States that has more higher ed institutions than stoplights. There's only one stoplight in town, two higher ed institutions. Alfred State's right next door. And my counterpart there reports growing enrollments as well. They are mainly driven by producing people for the trades and some fabulous opportunities for HVAC technicians, electricians, what you can earn nowadays in those fields. And they're an important part of America's success too. And so just assuming everybody's purpose should be one path, we need people with all sorts of talents powering our economy forward.
Why do you think that there is a lower percentage of American high school students who are telling the surveyors that they're thinking about going to college, they want to go to college, or they think it would be a good idea or affordable to go to college? We've seen not just COVID related. I mean, some of this impact probably comes from some of the culture wars or some politics of the last decade, but it's not, from what I can tell in the data, it's not just COVID related, that there is a real change in the trust of the institutions of higher education and higher learning. What do you think is driving that shift and maybe some of the negative reputation?
One is just the underlying demographics. People have had fewer kids. And so over the next 10 years, the college-going population is expected to decline in the Northeast by close to 25%, less so in the Southeast. But that demography is a headwind that the higher ed sector. That said, there are political questions, I think, largely driven by ideological debates over whether we're indoctrinating students or not. So it's on us to be able to articulate the value that a college education brings. We're developing our next strategic plan, and a key component of the next plan is making knowledge work. So how do we lean into our hands-on learning opportunities, be able to connect the dots for our students, curate experiences that'll make them then both professionally and personally successful? So it's on us to have to make that case and to be able to convince students and their families that that investment's worthwhile. When you look at the stats, it's still one of the most important, if not the most important, personal investment you can make. You out-earn compared to just a high school degree, 2 to 1 by going to college, 3 to 1 if you go for a graduate degree. But year in and year out, we've got to get better at making that case, especially with the headwinds of demography.
A listener named Rick says, Evan, at the risk of sounding cynical, I will simply state that I will believe that going to college is not important or valuable when the wealthiest families in our nation stop sending their children to college. Otherwise, it seems to me that this downplaying of college is an effort to curb competition by lower-income students with the children of the privileged. Yes, I agree we need to also have people who are trained in traditional trades like plumbing, electrical work, etc., but that should not be considered the only option for those who are from less affluent families. I wonder if your guest agrees with my assessment. That's from Rick. What do you think, Mark?
I don't know if it's an organized, but people can always be wary of competition. And we counter to that, we started a program where we're looking to identify, not based on SAT scores or ACT scores, but based on character. So individuals that a high school counselor believes will really blossom at Alfred because they have the nascence of our 3 core strengths. They foster a sense of belonging. They're already involved in their high school community. They have a multitude of interests so that they can capitalize on the myriad of pathways here at Alfred University, and that they've overcome significant obstacles. So individuals that come from more challenging economic, social circumstances, they've lost a parent, they've had to help bring up a sibling in the family, they've had to work at the family business to make sure the family. So we're looking for those character elements, and we found great success with how these individuals, with 5 years into the SAU Scholars Program, how they blossom, their success rates at Alfred University, and how they're helping to build community. So, but identifying those not on basis of privilege. Privilege tends to be tied to more higher SAT scores. You can take it more often if you've got more money, apply to more schools. We want to find those diamonds in the rough that'll make those those folks that have aren't identified will be lost Einsteins to our society.
I think Rick's email, the underlying point that it's instructive to look at what the wealthiest people in society are doing to see what they think has value and what will insulate their children in the future. I think that's fair. I think that that's a pretty good observation, because part of what Rick is saying there, Mr. Zupan, is that people are going to be thinking about their best interest and that they've got a pretty good insight into what the future will hold. But doesn't that also hold true for these moments in history where you kind of look at what people are doing to hold on to past industries? Your essay drew on the outdated agricultural economy as you read, at the expense of the then roaring manufacturing sector decades ago, and that it would have been folly to keep investing in an outdated agricultural economy. And people had a pretty good sense that the manufacturing sector was the way to go. I'm just wondering, what do you think is driving this mentality that political leaders in both major parties in our country have, the policymakers, when they are telling people we can bring back manufacturing? We don't have to tell you that it's a sector in decline, that we can reverse those declines. Instead of saying, no, we need to have some tough love here. That's not coming back, not in the way that you want, but there are ways to envision a future of jobs. Why aren't people saying the latter? Why are they saying the former?
It's where the votes come from, and toss-up states, especially at the national level, particularly focused on the heartland traditional industrial base. So creating a swing of a few percentage points can help you carry an election. But it's still incumbent, and to the listener's point, there is this element of inertia and maybe this argument that you're clinging to the past by sending your kids to higher ed if you come from a more well-to-do circumstance. But even when you look at the investing, the philanthropy, by far and away the largest gifts still go to higher ed. It's that old George Eastman quote that there are a lot of ills that ail the world. If there's one antidote, it was his belief in education, and that's why he gave so extensively to higher ed, whether it's the U of R, RIT, historically Black colleges, MIT, and we see it here, why people are willing to invest. So it's akin to, why do people put money in the stock market? Because they're also betting on returns, and that should be a comforting indicator, even if we believe there's some inertia in what motivates people decisions, where to send their kids to.
You told us this hour that that your own enrollment, that you feel pretty strongly about, you're getting a lot of applications, that there's a good bounce back post-COVID. But your colleagues have talked about, and we've looked at the data of a kind of a possible enrollment cliff that is not far away, based on the fact that the financial collapse and the crisis of 2007, 2008, 2009, we did see birth rates decline in this country. People literally were struggling enough that they were reconsidering the size of their families or having kids at all. So there are fewer kids who are ready to graduate high school this year, next year, and then the following year, based on that dip in birth rates. Is that overplayed, or do you think that is a very important thing?
It's an incredibly, imagine you're operating in an industry where a quarter of the domestic market is predicted to disappear over the next 10 years. So our strategies, what motivates our strategic planning is our strategies have to be good enough to overcome those significant headwinds. And there are opportunities, intergenerational wealth transfer when it comes to fundraising. We've had incredibly generous trustees, alums, supporters. There are parts of the globe that are growing. We've seen tremendous growth in applications. We have 14 new students this year from Tanzania. We graduated our first one. He was one of our two outstanding, Marlon Miller, outstanding senior award winners in 2024. Word's gotten out in Tanzania. It's a pretty big country. I've never been, but he had a great experience that led to 3 more students that joined our campus after that, and 14 new students. And just to tap into that, we've had a tremendous run this year in men's rugby. A great new Saxon Hill athletic sports complex being built. A coach that our athletic director, Deb Stewart, hired that had won the Division II championship nationally for a school in Maine. And we, last couple of weeks, it's just to watch this team in action. It's a dynamo. And the composition of the team, there is a player on the team from Kazakhstan, one from Bhutan, one from Bangladesh, 2 from Yemen, 1 from Zimbabwe. one from South Africa, and the rest from a variety of different states. So there are growing parts of the world that we have students from 29 different countries in the incoming class. We were incredibly nervous in May when Secretary of State Rubio put a hold on visa interviews. Thankfully, that eventually got lifted with the social media screening. Most of the applicants that have been accepted were able to join us this fall. If you were going to be joining us in January. So it's not overplayed. It's a huge headwind that higher ed's we're going to have strategies good enough and be able to explain the ROI to prospective students and their families.
I'm going to ask you to make sure that we kind of press that point again there. So earlier this year, there was a lot of concern about foreign students coming in, 29 different countries represented in your current or incoming class. What is the state of that? I mean, how concerned are you that for the next year and for the next 3 years, you're going to have a hard time having those students get to Alfred, get to universities in this country?
Andy Grove escaped communism in Hungary, led Intel in its heyday to great success, and he wrote a book once called Only the Paranoid Survive. And being a university president, those are good words of wisdom to be steered by in this day and age. So we're pleased with the students who joined us from all those different countries, but we cannot take anything for granted. The latest H-1B visas, who will be allowed to stay in the United States, if you're already here or not, how that gets clarified. And if people see more noise in the system, we lost a student this past year who we'd accepted, he was going to join us, but then with some of the noise decided to go to a school in Canada. And that losing that talent that the United States otherwise would attract, that's been such an integral part of our secret sauce. 40% of Fortune 500 companies nowadays have a founder with immigrant roots. And that's not even counting second generation. So Steve Jobs, his father escaped repression in Syria to pursue higher ed in the United States. If he hadn't had that opportunity, would we have Apple nowadays? So you worry both institutionally as well as for the United States. We run the risk of losing our mojo if we become less open to talent.
And what about research grants? You talked about that. I know that comes from a number of different sources, but is there a concern that federal support could dry up or change there?
A real concern. We did lose a Department of Education grant dealing with rural mental health and wellness. The previous administration wanted us to put in a DEI component. That's what got it axed under this administration. We were 2 years into the 5-year grant. We're going to be looking to figure out a way to restructure it, to work with our representative, Nick Langworthy, because rural health and wellness in a place like Allegheny County is vital. At the same time, we're seeing some great opportunities. We're one of the leading research shops in the country right now in a hypersonic flight. It's very important for national defense, so our strength in material science and engineering. We're seeing a growth in grants in those areas. We just had a major celebration in the context of our board meeting last week on what we're doing in the electric power grid. So with all the AI-based data centers supplying reliable power, we have great expertise with an electrical engineering degree and faculty, staff, and students doing research. We launched in November a Space Materials Institute that's focused on building structures on places like the Moon and Mars. NASA and SpaceX sent representatives to the launch. We got featured on USA Today. We account for 40% of the employees of SpaceX in Florida through our alums. So some marvelous opportunities for both grants and the research experience our undergrad students are going to benefit from through that institute going forward. But at the same time, there can be shifts. There's a lot of noise. Earlier in the year, is the overhead rate going to be changed? What'll get cut? We're not as exposed as the U of R, for example, on NIH grants, given the prestigious medical center at the U of R that they've had to worry about.
I think it's easy to just assume that tomorrow is going to be like today and that today is like yesterday just because of inertia, that it's hard to imagine change. But I do want to ask you before I get to some more listener feedback, what you think, how close you think we could be to a real shift, either culturally in how young people and families think about higher ed, or just in terms of the raw numbers needed for widespread higher ed survival. I'm not suggesting colleges and universities could go away, but I've heard some of your colleagues talk about consolidation. So you've got the concern that there could be fewer foreign students coming in the coming years. You have fewer students in high schools today saying that they consider higher ed an option or a good one. And you've got fewer people being born with declining birth rates. How close are we to a future that really does look different when it comes to higher ed?
I think higher ed has to continually reinvent itself and prove its value. That said, we're some of the most enduring institutions in the world. The first higher ed institution got started over 1,200 years ago by a woman in North Africa. So our ability to store, build upon knowledge, that organization has been the recipe to our success, and keeping on building on it as these dynamics occur. But we need to continue to making the case why this is a value, and how the worlds and how individuals that join our communities are going to be better off because of it.
When we come back from this only break of the hour, I've got some email to read from listeners. Listeners, if you want to join the conversation as we talk to Mark Zupan, the president of Alfred University, we're talking about the future of employment, the role of higher ed, the value that President Zupan sees higher ed bringing to not only their immediate communities, but the future of this country. And obviously that's been up for debate. It's been pretty heated in the culture wars this year, but for a number of years now. And I'm curious to know, listeners, if your own views of higher ed have changed, if you would talk differently to your children about that possibility, or if you still feel very strongly about one way or another about it. You can email the program, connections@wxxi.org. If you're watching on YouTube, on the WXXI News YouTube channel, please subscribe there, and you can join the chat if you like, or you can call the program toll-free, 844-295-TALK. It's 844-295-8255. 263-WXXI if you call from Rochester, 263-9994. We're coming right back with President Mark Zupan of Alfred University.
Supporting your favorite programs on WXXI TV and radio is just a click away when you go public at WXXI.org. It's a convenient and secure way of supporting an important community resource. WXXI.org. Go public and pledge your support today.
This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Angela writes in to ask if the president of the university on the program today is worried about getting targeted by the Trump administration if you are speaking too bluntly about the president or his administration. What do you say, Mark?
We have a program that got instituted 8 years ago called Common Ground for all of our first-year students. So colleges should be the place where learning to listen to different viewpoints, be able to express your viewpoints, working together. And we scramble all of our incoming students on every single dimension we can think of. And they're small group facilitated sessions. I've had the opportunity to facilitate them several years. And the goals are twofold. Number one, how do we learn to respect the different backgrounds, viewpoints, aspirations that we bring to the Alfred University community? And number two, what common values are we going to live by? So you get stronger by listening to different viewpoints. Sometimes the current administration has it right, sometimes it doesn't, but it's that listening, the dialogue that are key to finding the best ideas, whether it's for a campus community, an individual, or a nation. So we draw Republicans, Democrats, independents, and college should be that pivotal place where those dialogues happen. There is a debate in higher ed circles. There's something called the Chicago Principles. To what extent free speech should have primacy? It's an important component of the Bill of Rights. We completely agree regarding its importance, but we think if you just focus on freedom of expression at Alfred University, you're playing too small a game. That a lot of life is also listening respectfully, working with others that come from different backgrounds. Part of the problem with social media is it creates too much of a dopamine loop of just getting clustered with
Agree
people
with that.
think like you. And so how do we foster a place at a college like Alfred where you can benefit, you can grow by facing some of the different viewpoints that come on our campus?
Do you agree with I'm not even going to ask if this is a Trump administration view. I'm just going to ask in general. Do you think higher education in this country in the last decade overreached on cultural and I guess what this administration would call wokeism? Did it move too far in certain ways to the political left or to the cultural left?
I think in terms of political diversity, being more open, respectful, again, I believe higher ed overall did ourselves some damage by not being as open to different viewpoints. And it's something that our Common Ground program has at its heart to be mindful of. So universities, like individuals, like nations, make mistakes. The importance is to have those self-correcting mechanisms and learn from the mistakes and get better.
Is there any mistake that you want to point to specifically?
I think the conservative liberal mix and the openness to different viewpoints, that we should have been more mindful as an overall industry of fostering those different viewpoints.
And let me also ask you briefly before I get to some phone calls, if you think the Trump administration going after the Harvards of the world has been a mistake.
I think the manner in which they've gone after them and the rationale that there could have been much better techniques without doing as much harm as they've ended up doing to those institutions. And again, it would come back to the Brookings study and how powerful those engines are for promoting progress. A lot of talk these days about the damage to our soybean farmers. Higher ed, though, is over twice the magnitude in terms of annual exports, let alone the Ellis Islands that we are to attract talent from around the world, many of whom end up staying in this country, start ventures or contribute to ventures and make America stronger.
All right, let's get Carol and Bill on the phone. Carol first from Branchport. Hey, Carol, go ahead.
Hi, I just have a couple comments. I mean, I'm 65 years old now. I'm originally from southern Pennsylvania, very rural farm family, but my dad was a teacher. So I went to State University, got my degree in psychology, moved up here to Rochester, and even ended up directing a mental health program. I could barely make ends meet with my degree. At the age of 28, I went back to school at FLCC for ornamental horticulture. And 35 years later, I'm still doing designs, and I ended up also helping with the Rochester Landscape Technicians program, actually making triple what I would have made with my education. And I was so devoted to social work, but it wasn't a way to make a living. So I'm thankful I was able to go to college because that was really pushed growing up in the rural area. In fact, they wanted to deter you from agriculture and farming and probably being as poor as my grandparents. So, that's my lived experience now.
Carol, thank you for the phone call, listening on WEOS, Finger Lakes Public Radio. Anything that stands out to you, Mark Zupan, president of Alfred University, from that phone call?
Glad, Carol, that you found a meaningful and a rewarding purpose. And sometimes it takes prototyping, and sometimes what we explore isn't viable. I have the pleasure this semester of co-teaching a Design Your Life class that's patterned after the most popular course at Stanford. And we've been working with our students on their work views, why they work, their worldviews, what makes them happy. And it's all along the lines of realizing your purpose. And purpose has to be meaningful to you, sustaining to you at the same time that ideally also makes the world a better place. And it sounds like you found a meaningful purpose. And one of the exercises we're going through right now with our students is 3 different prototypes. Just to test out what you'd like to do the next 5 years, and then to test out how happy is that going to make you? What resources do you need? Is it going to be viable? So finding that out as early as we can, if we can find it out at 22 as opposed to at 35 or 40, we're going to be better off. And each of us are on this journey where it's important to identify and realize our purpose. So thank you for sharing your story, and glad to hear about your successes in the horticultural field.
Carol, good luck to you. Thank you for calling the program. Bill in Rochester next on the phone. Hey, Bill, go ahead.
Hi. I was going to ask about illiberal communities on campuses, but that seems to have been addressed, and I appreciate that. But I did want to also ask about grants. I've read that grants are more directed towards professors who embrace a progressive orthodoxy, even in areas like science. And I was wondering if President Zupan can comment on that.
Bill, thank you. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, the emphasis in different presidential administrations has differed to what extent they would like to see components. Mentioned the Rural Health and Wellness Grant, where we ended up adding. And because college campuses disproportionately still have not achieved the ideological diversity that I think would behoove us to be mindful of, there's some merit to that argument, Bill. But our grants largely are in fields dealing with energy and the sciences. NASA grant with our John Stoll Observatory, the work we're doing in hypersonics, the electric power grid. So there, you don't see that particular alignment. But the important thing is the grants go. Our provost and COO personally interviews every single faculty candidate, which is a huge commitment on the part of Beth Ann Dobie's part. And what she wants to identify is if undergrad teaching is not, and mentorship is not what motivates you, there are other places that are more focused on graduate, that are more focused on research for its own sake. Here, it's our undergrad students that come first and foremost, and we want to make sure that fits okay from the get-go.
All right, Bill, anything to add there?
No, but I do appreciate the feedback. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the phone call, Bill. Another bit of feedback here. Rick wrote back in to say, I just want to say I am impressed by what President Zupan said about having a first-year program intended to foster common ground among the students. There is no more important effort to be made at this moment if we truly hope to preserve our democracy and promote positive civic engagement. I will be looking up information about the Common Ground effort to learn more about it. That's from Rick. Anything you want to add there, Mark?
Rick, if you shoot me an email, zupan@alfred.edu, we'll get you more details. And we've been pleased. We haven't seen the issues that have surfaced on other campuses, and we think some of it is due to this Common Ground program. We've renovated our Hillel. It's full up this year through the generosity of alums and trustees. At the same time, we have a very vibrant Muslim Student Association on campus. So learning to respect each other, work with each other, you grow through being exposed to those differences.
One other brief note on this before I get back to other emails here. President Zupan, you mentioned the dopamine hit that social media can foster and kind of this loop that people get in online. They seek like views, like, and that breeds more extremism. I mean, I think there's been actual studies of if you get in an elevator going 12 floors and everyone on the elevator thinks like you, by the time you get off, you're going to be more extreme. I mean, like, it's amazing how that can happen. And I just feel like social media and the online communities that we kind of live in now, more than in the real world, have made us more extreme. And my observation, I have not been on your campus. I have not been on a ton of college campuses in the last decade. But, you know, there's a lot of passionate young people who care about the world. That's a good thing. But when they're kind of getting inculcated by these communities with this notion that any disagreement is kind of apostasy, and I think it, at least my observation is it might lead to some of the illiberal concerns that Bill has about campus behavior. Is that fair? Are you worried about the way students interact with each other? And do you think that there's a way to change some of that loop and some of that stuff that we get stuck in with social media?
Yeah, the more in-person dialogue and the more hands-on, the more you're glued. Jonathan Haidt has this wonderful new book, The Anxious Generation, and to what extent mental health and wellness being on the decline is due to just these dopamine feedback loops that we've put ourselves on and the tech companies have figured out how to benefit from. We have an athletic director, Deb Stewart, been doing a marvelous job, and she likes to say there's no growth in the comfort zone and there's no comfort in the growth zone. So exposing yourself to different viewpoints. Evan, when you and I were growing up, we were largely in TV markets that there were 2 or 3 television stations, 3 networks nationally. And so when you have limited opportunities, limited spaces to get your news from, you had to appeal to the middle and get viewpoints to ensure viewership, to get the ads. Nowadays, because of the splintering that technology has fostered and that social media has capitalized on, it's easier to go down huge rabbit holes where you're not growing. And if anything, it's teaching you contempt. I listened to a marvelous podcast this morning by Arthur Brooks, who's on the Kennedy School, Harvard Business School faculty as well. He started life, and this ties into Carol's point, as a French horn player in the Barcelona Symphony, and then realized he really liked ideas. And so he ended up getting an undergrad degree, then a master's, then a PhD, the first two at night. And on the quiet, because he didn't want to let on that he didn't want to be a French horn player anymore. But he'd like to counter that inclination to go for contempt, the importance of being respectful and conveying love, even when you end up disagreeing with the other people, but that there's wonderful growth if you can channel it that way.
All right, back to your email. Patrick writes, a fellow traveler with Carol. He says, I've got degrees in psychology and sociology, which I've never used. I'm also involved in ornamental horticulture. I'd love to get in touch with Carol. All right, Carol, let us know if you want Patrick to give you a phone call. But look, I think that experience that Carol is describing in many ways resonates with a lot of people like Patrick. So, Patrick, thank you for that email. And let me get Peter, who wrote in to say...
And let me just add
go ahead, Mark.
Evan,
yep.
Real quick. One of my big regrets in college is I never took a psychology class. And now in my day job, I've had to learn on the fly because it's so important to understanding what makes people tick. We just had two of our prominent clinical psychology alums back to talk to students, faculty, staff. It was a marvelous learning opportunity for me. So anyway.
I think we should all take a little bit of that. I think we should all take classes on different forms of reasoning and argument, but that's my opinion. Peter writes in to say, why doesn't the president of Alfred highlight the push for growing enrollment of Alfred University State School of Engineering, one of 2 or 3 schools with ceramic engineering in the country, a long storied history of materials engineering? I'm an alumni, and it feels as if he's growing in any enrollment, but not pushing the degrees that will truly help the United States. And goes on to say that the people he's encountered from Alfred with engineering degrees do great. Anyway, he's one.
Peter.
Do you think that that's
Peter,
an accurate characterization of what you're doing, Mark?
No, Peter, send me an email. We'll get you materials on how we're marketing the New York State College of Ceramics. We're celebrating 125 years of that college's success, and the alums have gone on to some wonderful accomplishments. When you use a smartphone, the Gorilla Glass was co-invented by an alum of ours. When we took the COVID vaccine, the vials were invented by another New York State College of Ceramics alums. Glass is a subset of ceramic engineering. We're the only school in the country that has bachelor's, master's, and PhD programs in glass science engineering. Fiber optics, how to transmit voice and data, another alum. So and the work right now in hypersonics for that. So we're incredibly proud of our New York State College of Ceramics. It also encompasses, and what makes us great, as a top 10 art school with being a world's leader in glass art and ceramic art. And we're building, Peter, you might know, a state-of-the-art foundry that'll create crossover programs, especially in our School of Art and Design and our engineering school.
All right, let's get ready to close with this last couple minutes, and this is really its own conversation, but I just want to get your, sort of your toe in the water on the future of AI here. Do you think, Mark, that in the future in this country, and I'm not talking about 1,000 years in the future, I'm talking about the next generation, maybe 2, that AI will account for more jobs or fewer jobs? And I hear people say, well, the horse and buggy industry was worried that the automobile industry was going to take their jobs away, and they just went and did different jobs. But AI feels different to me. I wonder if you think differently about that.
It's got that same, but we've gone through this before. We're actually bullish on AI. We're introducing a minor in that field, and we like to just half jokingly say we're leaning into Alfred intelligence, and we think people that know how to use it will be quite successful out there. When you look at the salaries that Meta was recently hiring to scale up its AI program, some of the salaries being commanded with folks in that expertise is one testament to it. There have been similar apprehensions when the computer came along. To what extent would it destroy jobs? There are different hypotheses, but I think we'll end up with a better life and actually more widespread opportunities as a result of being able to harness this power, this latest technological innovation.
If it doesn't kill us all, right?
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, assuming that. Yeah, sure. I want to thank the president of Alfred University for spending the hour with us. Mark Zupan is generous with his time, and he's got a great team that reaches out to make sure we are in touch and seeing what you're doing. He wrote a number of recent pieces. We've been talking about the U.S. News and World Report piece, but we can link, if we can, in our show notes to some of what Mark has been writing, if listeners want to check that out as well. And I just want to make this an open invitation, Mark, for you and your team to stay in touch with us, to keep us in touch with what you're doing. These are important conversations about higher ed, but it's also about the economy. It's about rural communities, and it's about where we go in the future. And so thank you for making the time, and I look forward to the next one.
Thanks for the opportunity to look forward as well. Take care, Evan.
Mark Zupan, president of Alfred University. A lot of great feedback from listeners this hour. I'm sure we'll have a lot more to talk about next hour when investigative journalist and Pulitzer Prize winner David Cay Johnston joins us. More connections coming up in just a moment.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.